and guests, and a very warm welcome to this, the fourth in a program of seminars or webinars hosted by the Parliamentary Research Unit. My name is Leon Gabriel. I am the Division Manager, Knowledge and Information Services at Parliament. And I'm standing in for Dr. Beso as facilitator today. He's unfortunately away on sick leave, and we wish him all the best. So these knowledge sharing initiatives form part of our implementation of the knowledge management and capacity building strategy in Parliament. Today, we will look at some of the aspects of the interface between the Fourth Industrial Revolution and the education sector. And we have a number of speakers lined up or presenters lined up. I'm sure we're all looking forward to learning a great deal from our lead discussants, and I encourage robust and active participation, particularly during our Q&A sessions. So without any further delay, we are humbled and thrilled and honored that our keynote speaker this afternoon is none other than our Deputy Speaker of the National Assembly, Honorable Senodi. Honorable Senodi is an erudite and seasoned politician and an exemplary human being who I'm sure needs no further introduction. So over to you, Deputy Speaker.
Thank you very much, Leon. I was about to stop you, to remind you that I'm still alive. This shouldn't be an obituary. You must reserve it when I'm dead. I'm really glad. I'm going to share some thoughts with you, and I hope we can work around those in the work we ordinarily do as a legislature. We are also part of a community of parliaments that from time to time come together to look at the challenges we are facing as different countries and so on. So our parliament is no exception in that regard. But perhaps I thought I should start a little earlier with us and say that the technology issues emerged for us some time back. During the presidency in the country of President Thabo Mbeki, the way we spoke about this was that this was about the information highway. How do we get our country onto the information highway? In other words, how do we, noticing key developments in the world of technology, ensure that we as a country are able, using our own ingenuity and creativity, are able to link up to what was emerging as a significant development in the use of a variety of technologies. Of course, and one of the, and the reason I like this story of that period is what was then created as an agency. The State Information Technology Agency was created with a view to setting up systems in the country for our engagement with these technologies. And it identified what it calls a house of values. In other words, whatever we do, we must be informed by a desire for technologies to be an extension of the work we must do, but they must introduce at least an element of convenience. Secondly, that there must be security in the use of these technologies, that what we communicate, the transactions that do occur there, the information that belongs to institutions, and including in the country, must be secure. So security was a critical component of one of those values. And thirdly, that there should be interoperability of systems. Oftentimes, there were already systems that were in place, that were being used, that if there was a way to be found to, so to speak, piggyback on the systems that where existing, we should be able to do so. There must be interconnectedness. This interoperability suggests and recognizes the connection of work that we do in government in a variety of ways. And of course, there's a fourth, which I will remember soon. But the important point I want to make about those three is that they also speak to the necessity for us as a country to protect our sovereignty. It is necessary that the technologies that we do employ, that we do design, assure us of control over what we develop, that it is within our ability and competency to manage and direct, and if they went wrong, we had the technical capacity to be able to deal with them and sort them out. So sovereignty as an overarching principle above the house of values was an important point. I do want to suggest that with that as a background, it is important to recognize the subsequent speed with which technologies develop, given what one of the experts and futurists in this environment suggested, that every 24 months, 18 to 24 months, the speed with which these things are developing is going to double. I guess at the time that this thought was expressed, there wasn't recognition of what the impact of the artificial intelligence, an outcome of one of these developments, would do to accelerate the generation of information and knowledge, and the combination of what is emerging with a reasonable sense of putting things together, that it would even accelerate faster than people had thought it would. And that has proven correct, because of the optimism of the World Economic Forum's founder, Schwab, who called these developments the fourth industrial revolution, positing a recognition that others do not agree that necessarily they constitute the fourth industrial revolution, that in fact they are an elaboration, others argue, an elaboration really and a deepening of the third industrial revolution in a significant degree. He, however, thought it constituted the fourth industrial revolution. I'm citing this to suggest that we must recognize that there are debates even as these things emerge. Parliament, as a premier political institution in the country, we argued, has a responsibility to act to ensure that we have policies that guides and that directs, that gives us, gives its staff, its members and staff an ability to engage with technologies in a more effective manner, but also to recognize the value of providing interconnectedness between institutions of governance that in any case has to report finally to Parliament itself. So some of those questions earlier about interoperability, of connectedness, of convenience are crucial. The most important ones, including the infrastructure layout in the country, the availability of undoing the digital divide that is occasioned by the inequality in our country, needed to be overcome so that we can accelerate the speed with which across the entirety of the country, people, every citizen has the ability to access the internet, have the ability to access these technologies and be able to engage in education, in creative pursuit of leisure, in creative work and remotely, but also in ensuring that we also provide for future and for posterity with the quality of archiving, automation of things, so that this can be valuable, that others coming after us will not have to reinvent the wheel, but always mindful of the necessity for security, as I said earlier. It's a crucial part of the story that we are talking about. I'm glad that these seminars are continue to look at these questions. And so when the Department of Higher Education confronted the reality that given the nature of the pandemic in the country, that the ability of universities to work in the old way is limited and hamstrung, so that there is a necessity to make an assessment of how far the infrastructure goes, what the impact of that is going to be on the ability of universities across the board to work with students remotely. But it so happened that we ourselves as Parliament, as we were adapting to migrate to virtual platform working, we recognize that many of our members stay in rural areas, in areas with no access to technology. Many of them, in some of the funniest videos as well, scenes that we noticed, had to drive to places where there is better reception for them to be able to access and be able to participate in the work of Parliament and so on. So that commissioned survey by the Department of Higher Education requesting it be done was a critical intervention, because it said, this is what the assessment says, and therefore this is what needs to happen to close the gaps that do exist, so that we can effectively allow for students to be able to continue their studies, even as we have to stay safe within boundaries and so on. And this is not just about, it's also about teachers and those who have to interface with students at that level, who needed to be able to get access, and their location was critical for this. These are important questions, but also there are always pros and cons to the technology, as we've come to learn, that it is necessary that we absorb now the many and very critical insights that have been developed in teaching effectively, in learning effectively, in creatively using these virtual platforms to do what otherwise would be difficult to do, but bringing them as close as possible to the human interface, which is quite critical and makes a huge difference. So learning and acquiring those abilities is part of the challenge that we face, that in the shortest possible time, we are challenged to create those conditions in our country where we address the questions of infrastructure, of access, internet access, of data. The cost of data is prohibitively high, and the monopolistic companies that run these things constitute part of the problem we should overcome to improve accessibility, not only by way of infrastructure, but by costs as well. That these systems are proving to be public goods that must be available to the greatest number of people in society, so that we can interact and engage in activities, be it of education, of work, or of any community education and interaction that is desired in any community. So for us and for as the leadership in this institution, we are glad that you are doing this, so that we must learn from the past, the initiative that we took before. I have argued and debated with your colleagues, Leon, that we must not underreport the work of Parliament that Parliament has done in the past. There are members who are not quite aware, because of our weak communication of processes that have been that has happened in Parliament, including tours that we undertook, the exhibitions that we have had, that we have not quite systematically gotten to where we can be assured that every member of parliament is familiar with these developments, is happy of the progress we are making to the findings and recommendations that were made in the past. And so this should constitute part of your assessment. This is going to be an absolutely critical terrain. Going forward, there's no question. We have to build systems that will constitute a legacy. When taken up by the 7th Parliament, they'll thank their predecessors for having done the right things in the right time, so that we do not allow any of the possible obstructions to prohibit the populace and in different sectors of society to progress on the back of the creative designs and innovations that are emerging from what we are referring to as the 4th Industrial Revolution. Its impact is profound, and so we must not underestimate the value we can add if we do well in, firstly, self-awareness inside the institution, but also interfacing with the public to continue the public education mandate, and engagement, public participation, making it effective through these processes. And so this is a critical part of the work that we have to undertake. Thank you very much. Those are the remarks that I thought I should share with you this morning as a part stimulant to what you will have as an excited presentation. I see my colleagues are going to speak to you. I hope they will challenge you sufficiently in their presentation as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Honorable Deputy Speaker. Always informative, thought-provoking insights and leadership. You've certainly set the tone. And in the interest of time, we'll move straight on to the next presenter, who is Ms. Rashida Beg. She's my colleague, and dare I say friend, fellow division manager in Parliament, in charge of core business support. And Rashida is going to share with us her insights on the role of Parliament in the context of the 4th Industrial Revolution. Thanks, Rashida.
Well, thank you for that introduction, Dr. Gabriel. Good afternoon, Deputy Speaker, honourable members, our learned guests and colleagues. As indicated, my name is Rashida Beg. I'm the Division Manager for Core Business Support in Parliament. And my presentation is going to focus on the 4th Industrial Revolution and particularly Parliament's role in relation to this. So I'm going to have a look at, firstly, what is the 4th Industrial Revolution all about? What is the impact of it? And specifically honing into our constitutional mandates of Parliament and what it is that Parliament has done in the past around 4IR and is currently still doing. And perhaps in taking a detour and reflecting particularly around COVID-19 and the impact that it has had, not only on Parliament but other institutions, but also in the execution of our core mandates. So I think a number, I'm sure that colleagues have seen and our guests have seen this representation of the different industrial evolutions and the changes it's brought about in our societies across the globe, starting with the first industrial revolution, with the introduction of steam and water power and how that has changed industries. Further, in the second industrial revolution, the use of electrical power and seeing a greater increase in manufacturing and production. And it's particularly the third revolution that's had a technology focus in terms of developing of IT systems and robotics. And the 4th industrial revolution is particularly focused and leans on the third industrial revolution in terms of building on cyber physical systems, using machines, learning through cloud technology. Now, against that background, Deputy Speaker has alluded to what we call the person that we attribute the terminology 4IR, Klaus Schwab, and he's identified the stage at which the world found itself on the brink of a technological revolution. So all intents and purposes, fourth industrial revolution is a technological revolution that has fundamentally altered the way we live, we work, and the way we relate to one another. And I'm going to share some examples in terms of how the 4IR has creeped upon us very quietly, and how it's installed itself into the lives, and therefore how it also impacts in terms of the role of Parliament. So this digital revolution is characterized by a fusion of technologies that's blending lines between the physical, the digital, as well as the biological spheres, and has changed the way we live and work and communicate with one another. Particularly from an executive perspective, talking about government, it's also changed the way governments operate. That's report about changes around our education systems. This is particularly relevant for the topic of discussion today. Also, healthcare has been impacted by it. And for all intents and purposes, we can say it's impacted on every facet of our daily lives. So this is just a characterization of the key components of the fourth industrial revolution, as well as the characteristics, and focusing on those characteristics. As Honorable Jamonia has alluded to, the interconnectedness with which the 4IR brings about in terms of a number of different fields and different areas. The relevance of data, particularly in a virtual technical world. We look at Facebook, we look at Twitter, YouTube, and the generation of data within our own spaces and different areas of work. The amount of data that we utilize, and I think Parliament is no exception in terms of data that we have available, and possibly not utilized to the extent that we should. The integratedness of the change brought about by the 4IR and the need for innovation and transition, particularly transition. Some of us tend to be a bit resistant to change and will need to be able to adapt to a new world and a new way of doing business, but also to a certain extent the way we engage with each other in different stages of our lives. What the 4IR has brought with it is a number of changes. For instance, the use of robots. And I've got here a picture, and I've repeated these pictures on another slide so it looks a bit bigger, as well as the references, so that you are interested in reading more about it, you can follow through on that. But this is a picture of a Robocop that's been introduced in the policing system in Dubai. And the Dubai government has set itself a target to ensure that its police force by the year 2030 comprises of at least 25% of these Robocops. And this is currently happening. It's been implemented over the last 5 years already. When we talk about 3D printing, I'm not sure how many of us know that South Africa, in fact, has got the largest 3D printer in the world. It's currently housed with our CSIR, and it's a part of a collaboration between CSIR and the Aeroset Innovation Center. So 3D printing is also quite important, particularly in developing countries, where some research has suggested that the use of 3D printing, for instance, to create housing is a possible avenue that governments could follow, particularly in developing countries where the need for human settlements is still at a high level. Here we deal with, I'm not sure, but when I first looked at this article around virtual reality, this is a depiction of a plot of land in the metaverse. So I'm not sure if everybody knows, but Facebook has since changed its name and it's become a metaverse. And metaverse is a virtual platform and a virtual, almost a virtual Facebook, if we can call it. And to share some interesting news, which a colleague of mine shared with me very recently. A plot of land on the virtual metaverse was recently sold for a staggering $2.43 million. So it opens up a very different world, and Parliament also is an interesting phase in terms of how do we as a legislature legislate, pass policies around virtual platforms such as the metaverse. In the past, you were faced with Facebook and issues around privacy. We're talking about something completely different now, and it's incumbent on the legislature to make sure that it also prepares itself to perform oversight over issues related to the metaverse, as well as pass policy legislation around it, and to make sure that it protects the interests of citizens in platforms such as the metaverse. We're all familiar with the internet and artificial intelligence. I think in the most basic form, our engagement with artificial intelligence are these chatbots that we find on different websites. There's also artificial intelligence used in terms of analytics as well as biometrics. And then cloud computing, the fact that we can store all our information in something that looks like a cloud, but it's not really visible as the clouds that we see outside. There are also issues about knowledge work automation. Find that there's a lot of data information, databases being established that are automated to make sure that we are able to have all these characteristics of the 4IR, particularly in terms of interconnectedness, availability of data, and integration of that data across different levels, different spheres in organizations. And then the issue of network security is obviously taken a different turn. The Deputy Speaker has alluded to this, but the need for us to guard against cybercrime, cybersecurity is becoming more and more of a reality. I thought this was some interesting information that I got out of the web around big data, and the fact that on a daily basis we create an estimated 2.3 trillion gigabyte of data. I don't know if we can encompass what that means in real terms. So largely looking at the impact of 4IR in general, it did require a review of government policies across the globe around the 4IR and its impact, particularly on society at different levels, particularly in the economy, the manufacturing industry, where we see a larger automation of routine tasks, and then obviously the impact that would have on labor and unemployment. And the counterpart of it is also the possibility of creating new jobs, particularly in the IT sector, that of app developers, data scientists, but also the continuous change that is introduced does mean that we require a new skill set. With some jobs being expunged and the creation of new jobs, there's a greater need, particularly in South Africa, for us also to look at how do we ensure that the unemployment rate does not increase, and how do we ensure that learners that currently find themselves in school are able to plan a trajectory for a career that's going to be relevant in the future of South Africa. So here we see the introduction, for instance, of school subjects such as robotics and coding. South Africa is no exception to that. Obviously, recognizing the need for making sure that our learners are able to path on the future in an ever-changing world. Similarly, in science and innovation, we have seen changes, particularly in the relevant portfolios, focusing on making sure that South Africa is able to traverse the 4IR and the country as a whole is not left behind, but also that we are still able to achieve our vision 2030. That does mean that the legislative arm of government, being Parliament, as the national legislature, is no exception, but we also need to ensure that we are able to, in terms of the constitutional mandate, pass laws around lawmaking, but as Honourable Chinoli said, there is a requirement that at the side of members and on the side of the administrative staff supporting members and these core mandates, that there's an understanding of the 4IR, there's an understanding of its implications. And therefore, when we give advice on laws that are being passed, we are doing so from a vantage point of a clear understanding and a knowledge base on these areas. Similarly, with overseeing the executive, so executive policies that impact on 4IR, at different levels and in different portfolios. I mentioned education is one example now. Science and technology is another example. But Also to ensure that the executive policies do speak and address both pros and cons of what 4R entails in the various portfolios. And the third leg of Parliament's core mandates, particularly that of public involvement. Parliament is constitutionally mandated to make sure that citizens are involved in our processes and also that of its committees. So it does require the institution also to look at 4R perspective, making sure that citizens understand what it means and what are the implications of it. So Parliament doesn't confine its educational role to simply talk about the lawmaking processes and the oversight processes. I think that we deemed it incumbent upon ourselves to engage citizens around the topic of 4R and what it would mean for a child in a rural area, or what it would mean for someone who's deciding on the choice of study at university, for instance. On our other mandates, particularly on cooperative governance and intergovernmental relations, from a sector perspective, these are also discussions and engagements we have with the other 9 provincial legislatures, as well as legislatures on international platforms. Now, in terms of what has Parliament done thus far, and in terms of our interpretation of the 4R, we do recognise that Parliament does play a central role, particularly in terms of its oversight and its lawmaking. And it's to ensure also that all South Africans leverage the benefits that the revolution has brought about it, also to secure and to guard against any of the negative impacts of it. So as a first point of all, it was important to make sure that all members and the parliamentary administration had a good understanding of the impact of the 4R in general, and then specifically also on the core mandates of the institution. Also identified parliamentary structures to ensure coordination. This knowledge management seminar is one of those continuous processes to make sure that the discussion around the 4R remains on the table and that we don't lose sight of it in the work that we perform. But particularly from an oversight perspective, the impact that it has on the critical sectors of society, industry, business and skill, and also taking into account what it is that the National Development Plan speaks about in terms of leveraging technology to ensure that South Africa remains relevant in the broader globe. So through the lawmaking functions, we must also ensure that there's an appropriate legal framework established for the 4R. And in terms of the applicable legislation, there's a number of pieces of legislation around information technology specifically, but also legislation and policies that are developed by various departments to give effect to 4R initiatives, be it under any one of the ones that I've listed in terms of artificial intelligence, for instance, it's to make sure that there's a balance of interest and the constitutional rights are protected. Particularly for 4R initiatives of the executive, it's a need for the legislature to have an evidence-based oversight over those initiatives, and this is why the knowledge base is critical for members and staff, as well as our key stakeholders. The question is probably, what has Parliament done? The 4IR terminology was coined somewhere in 2015, and Klaus Schwab published his book in 2016, and it was raised at the World Economic Forum at Dallas in 2016. Parliament immediately commenced with the process to ensure that there's an education and sensitization around 4IR and its implications for all South Africans. When I say all South Africans, I am referring to engagements that we have through our various fora, particularly our public participation teams, in terms of education workshops that are conducted and publications that they have produced. Spearheading this has been none other than our key guest, Honourable Jalori. We've initiated the first roundtable around 4IR and specifically the opportunities and threats that it offers. It was scheduled in May 2018. We developed a publication in there recognizing the critical role that Parliament plays around 4IR. We're further also under spearheaded by Deputy Speaker. There was an exhibition on demonstrating South Africa's readiness to embrace the fourth industrial revolution, February 2019, where a number of departments showcased some key initiatives that's been introduced in the departments under the FYR umbrella. And we've also had the Portfolio Committee on Higher Education, Science and Innovation hosting a FYR colloquium in October 2019, focusing on the impact of FYR, specific reference to education, particularly higher education, and the need for the review of curricula. Over and above that, South African Parliament has engaged on a number of international fora around the FYR, and we've seen some of the progress that's made by other countries and other parliaments around us. And that sharing of experiences also further improves our knowledge base and also would improve our abilities to deal with key pieces of legislation and overseeing relevant policies. So part of this exercise is also to shape that policy and legal framework within the various government portfolios. I think what's important is also to note that the need for broader civil society, specifically organized labours, NGOs, civil society organizations, also to be able to have similar discourse and conversations around FYR and its implications, and through their various structures to share that with their constituents. And this is where our Public Education Office played a role in terms of developing material and conducting a number of education workshops on the fourth industrial revolution. Our view is it's not a once-off exercise that needs to happen at a particular point in time. It does require continuous engagement because the world is shifting as we are talking. And one of the shifts, I think, was propelled by COVID-19 specifically, and the way it's impacted the work of Parliament and the way it's changed the way we're working. I think the fact that we're having these webinars is a telling sign of the shifts that we have undertaken with the FYR and with COVID-19. And I thought I should just share some information, particularly for our guests on the platform who's not familiar with parliamentary workings. I think it was a formidable task, but it just shows the resilience of the institution, of members and staff. It took us 2 weeks of training to get members and staff to use MS Teams and Zoom at a time when the COVID-19 pandemic did not allow us to have physical meetings. Excuse me. Committee work resumed within 2 weeks after the declaration of the state of disaster in March 2020. And I think the IPU has recognized the gains made by a number of legislatures, including Parliament of South Africa, in terms of ensuring business continuity despite the lockdown and its implications. So we've had a number of virtual committee meetings, and it's become the order of the day. Also virtual public hearings to ensure that citizens are aware and are able to still participate, so it's an issue of accessibility. Virtual sittings of both houses have since moved to hybrid sittings, allowing taking into account the opportunities that technology provides us. I think one of the challenges that we have, the Deputy Speaker has alluded to this, particularly around accessibility, having access to Wi-Fi and social media. And we'd like to look at other innovative solutions to make sure that we're able to engage citizens, particularly on key legislations and issues impacting them. So community radio stations, television, using WhatsApp as a tool to allow citizens to participate in Parliament and to make their voices heard. Also making data available, particularly for citizens in the rural areas. Use the social media platforms, and we're constantly looking at what are the different ways that we can use the changes in our environments to be able to improve on particularly public participation. So it does paint a picture of we're still living in what we call a VUCA world, a volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world. COVID-19 particularly has seen an increase in the use of robotics and digitalization, and some would argue, and this is also one of those debates, as Deputy Speaker said, there's still a debate about the fourth industrial revolution, but some would now argue that there is also the onset of the fifth industrial revolution, which also builds on the 4IR. And I think it's probably a topic for another seminar. However, it does mean that Parliament and its administration must remain agile and responsive to ensure that the needs of citizens are preserved in this changing landscape. So it does look at our skills, our competencies, our abilities, our knowledge base, our engagements and seminars of this nature to make sure that we are able to share the knowledge, but also gain knowledge to improve our ability to execute the core mandates of the institution, and from the administration side to be able to support it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Begg. Again, insightful, thought-provoking presentations, and thank you for sharing your perspectives and also giving a brief account of not only the role of Parliament, but what Parliament has done thus far. I think from both the keynote address and Ms. Begg's presentation, one of the key messages is that we should do whatever is required to keep up with the rapid pace of development in 4IR, particularly to ensure that it doesn't inadvertently widen the inequality gap. Having said that, I open the floor for questions or comments on the two presentations. It's an opportunity to engage the insights of the Deputy Speaker and Ms. Begg, who's been working in 4IR for a while, working in Parliament. I'll take a show of hands. I don't see any at the moment. Okay, I'm also going to look at the chat. If there are any comments or questions, please do put them in the chat. We can pick it up from there as well. Okay, I see no indication at this point, and I'm sure people, colleagues are still processing the information and the wealth of information that we've received from the two presenters. I'd like to suggest then that we move on to Mr. Jonathan Fries, who is Senior Curriculum Planner for Technology at the Western Cape Education Department. And Mr. Fries will be talking to us today about his views or his insights in addressing inequalities in basic education. I will then also invite the chairperson of the Portfolio Committee on Basic Education, Honorable Binko Gigaba, to immediately facilitate the Q&A after Mr. Fries's presentation. Oh, I see there's a hand from Dennis Joseph. So, Mr. Fries, if you could just bear with us.
Hello?
Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, can you hear me now? I just wanted to make a comment on the budget for government, and our Treasury will work all this in. It's a mammoth task, but yeah, I just wanted to know our Treasury will work this in going forward. It's so important, and thank you very much for the presentations. Very, very helpful and interesting, educational, and it's building our capacity as members to understand what the role of Parliament is. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honourable Joseph. Deputy Speaker or Ms. Begg, you want to venture some insights in terms of how we build this into the budget nationally and the role of Treasury?
Dr. Gabriel, if I can venture a response. It's not an easy answer. My understanding is, and my view of the budget allocations for departments is that this is built in as part of policy from the executive. So provision has obviously been made under specific departments that are impacted by this. I think what would be useful, Deputy Speaker, with your permission, we will definitely share the first report that we had around the round table, because it did speak to the key departments that will be driving 4IR from the executive perspective, and also what it is that we're planning to do. The issue of budgets obviously aligned in terms of what those plans and projects are within each of those departments. So, for instance, education has got a specific role to play when it comes to introducing new subjects such as robotics and coding, and the departmental budget and allocation must make provision for that. It's similar with the other departments that's been assigned certain responsibilities under the national policy. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, Ms. Begg. Deputy Speaker.
Well, let me firstly let me say that the word that Ms. Beck used in his presentation of VUGA, which actually came from the military in the United States. In the Nguni language, it means wake up, or be aware, or be vigilant. This is what it means. It's a very useful one. I don't think they had in mind what it means, but this is what we must appreciate its meaning, that in a volatile, uncertain, ambiguous environment, your chances of survival are better if you are aware, awake, and alert. In a sense, that's a very crucial observation. On the budget issue, I think this is one area in which we as Parliament must raise the significance of appropriate budget allocation to this environment because of the ripple effect it will have, the creativity it will unleash if we deploy these resources timelessly so that we do not delay. The budget is often thought of its quantity and perhaps appropriateness, but we must also think about it as its appropriate deployment. In other words, when it is given, so that when you talk about how much, it is because of what you can already anticipate of what it will unleash, what it will generate by way of creativity, what it will do by way of releasing trapped energies of people in various locations by simply investing sufficient resources to build the technological foundations for doing it faster, better, and timelessly, as I say. So that's the argument that I want us to do. Positioning ourselves as Parliament, as we have been trying to do to various ministers and to cabinet, broadly speaking, is to say to them, we have a responsibility like you to ensure every rand is used for the purposes for which it was meant. And part of that environment is going to be one that is built by technology. There's no question about it, that to reduce too many fingers, of course, thieves and criminals are always following through, if not sometimes ahead of us. So we have to constantly be noticing that, closing the gap, and making it absolutely difficult for them to steal the little resources we do have for the sustainable initiative that require budget allocations. So this is an important issue of the resources that we make. So when in debate and discussions about amounts, let's remind others about what we anticipate will be the impact of our deployment of these resources and why it is crucial that we do it now urgently so that we are better prepared when the next waves of other pandemics come up. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Honourable Deputy Speaker. I would allow a second and final round for questions by show of hands. I see none. Can I then invite Mr. Jonathan Fries again, just to remind you, he's Senior Curriculum Planner for Technology at the Western Cape Education Department, and he will be addressing the inequalities in basic education. Mr. Fries.
Good afternoon, Mr. Gabriel. Is my voice audible and is my presentation visible?
Yes, certainly, Mr. Fries, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. In terms of the context, in 2019, our President Cyril Ramaphosa, at the State of the Nation address in February 2019, he announced that coding and robotics will be a subject at school level from grade R to grade 9. That unleashing of policy made all of us think about how ready are we, how ready is DBE, how ready are the provinces, the districts, and the schools. So all of that in the backs of our head, but at the same time, it came with much excitement because this is the South African response to the fourth industrial revolution. Our current curriculum offering does not assist learners to be employable and relevant in this fourth industrial revolution. So we need to take a look, and I'm speaking here from the Western Cape perspective, because that is where I work, and that's where I reside, and that's where I gather my knowledge from. So before the pandemic, what was in place in this Western Cape Education Department? We had in 2015, our first school received broadband from the Western Cape Education Department. We currently have 1,300 schools with broadband out of the 1,500. We have 237 remote schools who reside in areas where there isn't broadband available. They receive a stipend. So all schools in the Western Cape are connected to varying degrees. 779 schools have a full local area network. That means all of those classrooms in those schools are connected to the internet. 486 have partial LAN. We have smart classrooms in 808 schools. It's 10,000 or 35,000 classrooms. We have in FET, we have subjects like CAT, IT, and engineering and graphics design, where we have 229 labs, computer labs in 217 schools. We have Slim Lab projects, 1,300 labs, model schools, and then also before the pandemic, and just at the time of the announcement by Cyril Ramaphosa, the Directorate for E-Learning, they started the demystification and coding workshops for teachers in the Western Cape province, just to prepare, to contribute to preparing the system for this coming curriculum. Okay. In terms of continuing with the enabling environment, we also then immediately started developing as a collaboration between the two directorates, e-learning and curriculum. We developed a 4IR strategy document in 2019. And then this is very telling, the next point, in GT, we had a 5-day robotics workshop with the technology advisors. This is early 2020, just a few hours before the pandemic. What was very telling about that, all of those advisors are now the district lead people in coding and robotics. So in the Western Cape, what we've done has assisted in going forward. Then we have our CTLI, Cape Teaching and Leadership Institute. We have a tremendous number of courses that were in place, and I'll speak some more of that in a moment. And then also before the pandemic, our GET curriculum director noted that the CAPS curriculum was a bit too bloated and we needed to trim that curriculum to make it more manageable for teachers and schools. In FET, we have a well-established telematic program that's going on for many years. And then in January of 2020, the DBE pulled together a first for this country in terms of curriculum development, pull together HEIs, NGOs, companies, education officials, unions into one space to develop the first round of this robotics curriculum. In the Western Cape, and this is very important, is we have our Knowledge and Information Management Directorate. We have a centralized management and information system. This system, it's in place for many, many, many years. The seamless system meant that schools were comfortable prior to this pandemic and prior to the introduction of the fourth industrial revolution, the coding robotics announced by Cyril Ramaphosa. Our schools were comfortable with uploading, downloading information. Cyberspace for the fourth industrial revolution was comfortable. During the pandemic, while we were on lockdown, there was amazing things that happened. For instance, in our Teaching Development Directorate, we have the Cape Teaching and Leadership Institute. They converted 65 face-to-face courses to online courses. It was a massive undertaking, but they did it and they got it right. They offer a bouquet of courses around different curriculum subjects, school management, wellness, as well as ICT integration. The models that they use is face-to-face, blended learning, and now the one that they're going for more is a hybrid learning where you can actually, during these courses, you can access so many more participants in a hybrid learning environment. They also plan on establishing a Moodle LMS platform for courses. The GET Directorate during lockdown, they did not sleep. You find head office officials and district subject advisors were 24 hours a day virtually indulged in developing weekly lesson plans for every subject for the entire year. These were aligned to the DBE trimmed annual teaching plans. We'll find on our WCD portal, the website address is there. We'll find 3,000 lessons and 514 take-home packs. The log, we have 30,000 daily visitors and 500,000 monthly visitors to the e-portal. 48% is traffic from the Western Cape and 42% from other provinces. So you have a cyber physical space where people could access lessons. In the Western Cape, where schools could download it, they received a budget from the Western Cape Education Department to be able to print those resources for schools and for learners to take home so that they could use them there. Okay. The DBE Coding and Robotics pilot on the 19th of March, and Mutsecha released the draft coding and robotics curriculum. And that pilot, of course, the Western Cape is involved in that. And we've indulged in the orientation session, 40 hours of orientation. Our foundation phase received training from UNISA, but we have not implemented due to the challenges. The challenges are resourcing. When I say implemented coding and robotics in the classroom. That's what I'm talking about. We have not provided the schools and teachers with adequate resources. They have not received kits. We have another challenge is timetabling, introducing a standalone subject into a very full curriculum offering it should be an act of policy change. We do not have a guideline for that. So schools are not able to timetable coding and robotics into a full week of 27.5 hours. The other challenge is training. Teachers are not feeling confident enough to enter the classroom. So we are looking at developing a training session where they can understand the methodology as well as the content. So yeah, robotic systems there are so many robotic systems. Most of them require internet connection, but the challenge that we have in our country is that either there is no internet connection at a school, or the connection is intermittent. That calls schools for a frustrating classroom engagement. So the system that we choose has to be able to be fully functional in an offline environment for that context. Other contexts where connectivity is fine, that's not a problem at all. And the system also needs to be suitable for classroom management. We found some robotic system where there are 700 components in a kit. We cannot put that in large classrooms. We need a minimum of a number of components that for a teacher can deal with classroom management, and then also with the correct play-based and project-based, exciting, inspirational methodology. And of course, the prices of these kits, some of these kits are 8,000 to 10,000 Rand. We've done our research and development, and we've managed to develop kits for closer to 1,000 Rand. We found that we have a bureaucracy like all other provinces. We have a bureaucracy, and the bureaucracy works with a particular set of rules and a particular understanding. We've had to institute a demystification and systemic awareness program. If the system doesn't know about coding and robotics, the system will not support coding and robotics. So what we did is we ran workshops with our broad management and leadership, so all directors of all directorates in the province. It was wonderful to see them controlling and coding robots and being children again. So the system becomes aware, and the bureaucracy becomes aware, and so we get support in the most remarkable ways. So we've also done this workshop with all 8 district management teams. So all our district management teams, that bureaucracy also has an understanding of the 4th industrial revolution and coding and robotics. Then we also have committees in place, head office committees, provincial committees, and committees in every single district. So now in the Western Cape, we have a system that is aware, a system that is ready, and a system that is supportive. Okay. This is the robot that we've developed. It's the REACH robot. REACH is an acronym, Robotics Education and Coding Hubs. We've developed this robot in collaboration with the Cape Town Science Center. So we have 500 manufactured and 1,000 teacher guides printed ready. Each district has received 20 of these for professional development, and we are using them for clubs and hubs at schools as well. So now, as we exit the COVID pandemic, what plans do we have in place? In terms of our bureaucracy has approved the post of Deputy Chief Education Specialist for coding and robotics, one for foundation phase and one for intermediate phase. Foundation phase interviews were last week, and the intermediate phase interview is in 2 weeks' time. And that is a result of our systemic and awareness program that we did. So there is fantastic support for coding and robotics in the province. Then we are busy with improvements and version 2 of the robot. We will be establishing 44 high school clubs in this year, 2022, and a minimum of 24 primary school clubs in 2022. The Science Center is a collaboration partner for the 22 primary school clubs, and the 44 high school clubs in collaboration with the British Council. They are funding the project for the high school. We are developing courses at our CTLI, Cape Teaching and Leadership Institute, and these courses are for infusing coding and robotics into current CAP subjects. So we'll do a foundation phase course, an intermediate phase course, and a senior phase course. What is very important is the school management teams course. A short course for school management teams on how to bring coding and robotics into your school, how to manage it, and how to sustain it. So that is what we're doing there, and we will also be requesting that the circuit manager join the principals in that, so we can have a nice golden thread of bureaucracy right into the classroom. We're also currently busy with a high-level, multi-year coding and robotics proposal that is in the development phase. So in conclusion, the way forward is characterized by an effective cross-directorate collaboration. We've been doing that, and there's no one directorate that can provide an adequate solution for the way forward for infusing a fourth industrial revolution into the classroom. So we will be collaborating on a number of projects like we have been, and going forward we're doing that. What I like is that we're getting the budgets from all these organizations. Challenges. Coding and robotics will have to be inclusive of all schools. There's no economic apartheid that must happen here. The poorest schools must have the same opportunities as the richest schools. That is why we're looking at a cost-effective robotics kits. At 1,000, I just met an organization in this week who showed me a kit for under 1,000 Rand. So we're looking at 1,200 Rand, as opposed to the Lego kits. When most of the videos that you get on WhatsApp, you're going to see Lego kits. Those kits are 8,000 to 10,000 Rand each. That is limiting for fourth industrial revolution infusion into an inclusive environment of all schools. Robotics and coding must not necessarily be for those who can afford it. Okay. Then in terms of development and support, need 21st century cyber-physical support to schools and to teachers on time, when they need it, how they need it, and quickly. Then the selected robotics kits, moving forward, you want to make sure that these kits can serve an offline context. And then effective training and methodology is important. We're looking at, it's wonderful to see kids having fun while they're learning. Play-based learning and project-based learning. Deep learning happens when kids are inspired, when they take over the learning environment. It's remarkable to observe that. So, ladies and gentlemen, our learners are more than ready for this. But how ready are we? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fries, for sharing not only the initiatives and developments in FIR in the Western Cape Education Department, but your obvious passion for the work that you're doing. So thank you for that. Before I hand over to Honorable Chairperson of the Portfolio Committee on Basic Education, Honorable Mbinko Gigaba, I do want to acknowledge the presence of the Acting Deputy Secretary, the Acting Secretary to Parliament, Ms. Chawa. And then Honorable Chairperson, we did have a hand from Honorable Chantal King from the first round, and then also Honorable Manwinkosi Fazani. So just to give you a heads up, Honorable Chair, we can start with those two. And then there are also some comments in the chat and a question, I would say, from Mashireen Dawood also in the chat that one can address. I hand over to you, Honourable Chairperson of the Portfolio Committee, Basic Education.
No, thank you very much, Dr. Gabriel, and afternoon to everybody that is part of the webinar. I must say thank you very much, Mr. Fries. It's a very informative presentation that you've just made for all of us, addressing the inequalities in basic education. And I think everybody agrees that robotics is the way to go. I'll start by the hands that Dr. Gabriel has mentioned, Honorable King, and I'm not sure who's the second one. Can you help me there, Gabriel?
Manikosi Fazani, Chair.
All right. Can we get those hands, both of them first, before we attend to this presentation of Mr. Fries? King?
Thank you, Chairperson. My question was basically going to be on NACI when it comes to the fourth industrial revolution. When we do policy, it is always going to be good for us to have one central view on where we are going to go when it comes to digitization and the Internet of Things. So my question was basically going to be, would it not then be feasible that at some point we consider to have one focus in the presidency, that NACI be placed in the presidency's office to ensure that at the end of the day, all departments of government actually has a focus when it comes to the 4IR policy and framework that is going to be rolled out as time goes on. But I'm also going to go into the basic education sphere. I hear what the Western Cape is doing, and it's all great. But myself, previous educator from a rural area, we always find that those in the rural setting and schools have an issue when it comes to infrastructure development. We have the new thing now of load shedding that is hampering them from accessing the various access of coding, robotics, or any internet facility. So we need to look at the framework for a specific rural strategy framework to ensure that we look at how are we going to advance computer skills, internet usage, how can we do wireless internet for schools, and also the most important thing is how the cost factor when it comes to the rural setting for those schools to be able to afford the equipment necessary to impart this various knowledge. But also we need to engage universities when it comes to educator training in terms of also setting up from the Department of Education at universities to ensure that they also have these programs of robotics so that we get a fresh start of new educators coming into the market already knowledgeable and skilled on how to impart this knowledge over to the students. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Can we get a second hand from the first round? Is the person still there? Mr. Fries, I take note that you should be taking note of what is directed to you, though we are still here. Okay, can I then note hands? I see there is a hand of Solomon Mtombeni for this round, for this topic 2. That's the only hand I'm seeing now. Can I then allow you to speak?
Thank you, Chair. Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Yes, Chair. Chair, thank you very much to Mr. Fries for the presentation. I just have one short question. Given that there has been reports that were released over the past 2 years regarding the mathematics education at lower level, rating our country one of the worst in the world, and given that the fourth industrial revolution requires a huge portion of mathematics knowledge or understanding. Also, in addition to that, it was said also that primary school kids around grade 4 cannot read for meaning within South Africa. So introducing this whole coding and robotics in all these plans, will that not hamper, will the introduction of robotics and everything not be hampered by the poor, most basic educational skills, such as reading for learning, as well as the mathematics per performance within schools? Thank you.
Thank you, Baumtembeni. There is no hand except that there are charts, which I think you are able to see, Mr. Fries, as well. From David Millar, where he says it's excellent presentation. You ask the important questions. Love the systemic approach. If we do not embrace it as a province across the district, we won't nail it. In the Western Cape, it is clearly in the hands of the very best. And then he says again, ineffective or shit lack of infrastructure in rural areas is one of the biggest risks to the rollout of the entire 4IR, CNR especially, curriculum. It will widen inequality gap. Excellent point, Chantel. And then there's one from Fiona Clayton. And she says, is there any support or partnership from, I suppose it's within UNICEF and the Legal Foundation in the implementation of the 4IR in the curriculum? Okay. I think many people prefer to write. There's also something from Elmari Peterson. Our teachers are not trained in the pedagogy and methodology for teaching coding and robotics. Unfortunately, this is not the focus of DPE, but implementation is required. Before teachers can implement, they need to know the pedagogy and fundamental methodology required. We talk about computational thinking, but very few teachers know what computation thinking is and how to teach computational thinking. These are some of the system problems we need to consider. Teacher training is paramount. And then there is something from Sharon Dawood. With the current devastation in KZN, how do one capitalize now on artificial intelligence, in particular machine learning, to play an important role in disaster risk reduction and more particularly on future impacts of climate change? So those are the issues that are raised by hand, by chat. And then we've got Babum Tombeni that has raised his point on issues of robotics and the fact that as the Western Cape, you are presenting that it is and it should be a South African response to the issues of inequalities. Now, with all that is raised, both on the charts and what is raised by Babum Tombeni, I'll hand over back over to you, Mr. Fries, to give responses. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Kigaba. I'm first going to go to Solomon's question. He had a dual question around maths education and 4IR and reading for meaning. A calculator will calculate things very quickly and accurately for us. We have apps for calculating. If you want to know how many, let's say I want to know how many days old I am. I'm going to go to a calendar and calculate that. But then I need to, then maybe I must ask how many years, how many months, how many minutes, how many seconds. I'll be able to calculate that eventually. But if there is an app for that, it is absolutely instant. I just put in my birth date and I get all that data. Now, how does that happen? It's a combination of two things. That is mathematical thinking and computational thinking. So mathematical thinking is using the operations of maths. And then in the fourth industrial revolution, we have what is called computational thinking, the development of that app. It ends in, I don't have the time to go into the whole discussion about computational thinking now. I can, but I don't think there's time. But the result of computational thinking is an algorithm to solve a problem. So the fourth industrial revolution brings mathematical thinking and computational thinking into the same space. That's what it does. We have no alternative. We have to do computational thinking in our classrooms. But computational thinking, the word is it sounds so confusing. What is this big word all about? But it's the most natural problem-solving process that we all do on a daily basis. I would love to be able to have the time to go into it, but I just don't have the time now. But please read up about it. You find out my word. Cleaning a room. The process of cleaning a room is the process of computational thinking. We do it every day. Common sense, logic, that is what computational thinking about. So bringing that into that space, you have computational thinking works in the physical space, and then you have mathematical thinking that works more in the cognitive space. Bringing that together, if you keep maths in a concrete environment where learners are challenged to solve problems, then it deepens the understanding of maths. In education, we go too quickly in maths to the cognitive way of maths, where it takes many years for learners to achieve independence in terms of their doing maths in that concrete and cognitive environmental space. So the two must come together, and the two support each other. They enhance each other. I don't think we should first get the maths right and then bring in the computational thinking of the 21st century. In terms of reading for meaning, if you look at when a learner is involved in computational thinking, when they arrive at that algorithm, it's precise procedural logic that is happening there. The robot must move 2 steps forward, then turn right and move 4 steps forward. Then it must pick up the glass. Now, did you hear the words? And I did not imagine children having the most amazing fun to get this right, by trial and error. But when they get that final algorithm, they have to be absolutely precise in telling that robot, in programming that robot for what it needs to do. Now, when kids are having fun, the brain is open for learning. It's a greater chance of learning the complexities of language. So what I'm saying in terms of maths and language, you bring the fourth industrial revolution into the classroom. The language and maths enhances the coding and robotics, but coding and robotics enhances language and maths. So I believe there's a place for them in the classroom, and with an exciting methodology of play-based methodology in the classroom, we can turn this country around. I believe that. I absolutely believe that. Okay. Then there's other comments around rural. When it comes to rural, it's a very big challenge where you have schools where the infrastructure at the school, even electricity at that school, is a challenge. Now, is it possible for those learners to get the same or a similar experience? We have to look, let's first look at the offline environment. If you look at what's happening at Nelson Mandela University, where you have the offline system called boats and tanks. Okay? Prof. Greiling developed that, and there's a momentum happening around this. Many schools are using it, and with little training, learners can learn the concepts of coding without having a screen in front of them. With little training, teachers will be able to teach it as well without having a computer in front, without being connected to the internet, which is absolutely fantastic. It's a game. It looks like puzzle blocks, but you can learn coding concepts right to university level with this concept. There's an offline space, but learners must also have an online experience. If you bring a server, and sometimes a server, when we hear server, it is sounds like it's one of those big things that must come in the back of the truck. A server can actually fit in your pocket. So if you have a server, like a Raspberry Pi server, right, where you can load a Moodle learning management system on a Raspberry Pi server. Learners can learn in an online environment in a place where internet does not exist. That technology is available. It works. I've done a test run with that with the Simonstown Navy. I've done a test run with their system, and I've done it away from their system. It works in a space where there's no coding and robotics, no internet connection. Then another comment about the Lego Foundation. Lego is a remarkable system. It's been around for many years. There's probably around 70,000 Lego clubs around this planet. They are absolutely a very stable robotics environment. But the two issues with Lego is, number one is the cost, and number two is the number of parts in the latest Lego set. There's like 750 parts in there. Put that in a classroom of 40 learners, it will be an absolute nightmare for the teachers. Then economy of scale. You're going to try and roll out Lego to 25,000 schools. If you ask Lego for their advice, how many learners on the robot? They can just say 3. Imagine the cost at 8,000 to 10,000 rand per robot, times 25,000 schools, times how many million learners in the system. Impossible for us to implement systemically. We have to think about a systemic implementation. Lego, I support 100% because it is a fantastic system for those who can afford it and for those who have a consistent, successful internet connection. Lego is not the answer for a systemic intervention in South African education. It has to be something that is a lot cheaper. There's another thing also, learners must interact with robots, yes, but you can also have robots online where you have a simulated robot online, a simulation or an emulation of an existing robot. So you can teach maths with a robot that's moving around on the screen. So you can do all of that. So there are a number of solutions, but we need to match the right solution with the context that we're serving. There's never going to be one answer in the South African circumstance because we are so divided in this country in terms of economy and services. We are so divided. So we need different solutions with different sectors of the economy and different geographical spaces in South Africa. the training around the comment about training and pedagogy are very important. The training experience that teachers have, they must feel enriched in terms of knowing the content. They must feel confident in being able to apply that content, and they must have practiced and transformed their teaching into teaching in a play-based environment and a problem-based methodology. So that's the methodology that must happen. Central to the success of coding and robotics in this country is the adequate, deep training of the teachers and ongoing short courses of teachers throughout their career, just to keep them fresh with the latest trends in the fourth industrial revolution. The last one, I think, is around HEIs. HEIs are a very difficult situation at the moment. HEIs can only base their courses on an existing approved curriculum. The current draft curriculum has its issues. It's going to have to be revised. Okay? Once the curriculum is gazetted, that is when the HEIs can start doing their courses. But it doesn't stop, and I'm putting a challenge out to HEIs now. There are concepts that are common and are global to all curricula around the world, because this is the fourth industrial revolution. It's easy to identify those concepts. In preparation for the coming gazetted curriculum, HEI should be offering short courses to teachers. 1 hour on if statements in coding, or a 3-day workshop, or a 2-week workshop, or just short courses just to get the population of teachers, and you recognize those courses, those short courses. Give those teachers the credits, so that when this course becomes a full-on course, the teachers can do recognition of prior learning, and then it won't be long for them to get the full qualification. I think that I've answered all the points, but if there's anything that I've missed, I'll be happy to respond to that. Thank you so much.
No, thank you very much, Mr. Fries. There are just 2 chats again from Rian van der Berg. If learners are expected to use computers in order to code, why is typing not a core skill taught from a young age? And then from, sorry for my pronunciation, it's Zuba Rahim. South African government should consider the use of blockchain technology in the provision of services and leapfrog into the digital era, thanks to an online system built around every resident having a digital identification, which uses a single login to access every government services and giving them a legally binding digital signature. Everything from filing taxes to registering the birth of a child can be done in a mere minute from the comfort of their own home. And then Chantel is agreeing on HEIs. And she also raised, she said, we need to focus on multidisciplinary educational platforms, strengthening schools of skills and strengthen uptake of STEM subjects, and at school to ensure a capable cohort for PSET sector. So what I'll do now, I'll just check if we've got more hands, if we do have hands for a second round, and I see that we don't. So I will then allow you to respond, Mr. Fries, and immediately then hand over to you, Dr. Gabriel. And thank you very much for the opportunity. Thank you, Mr. Fries.
Okay, thank you so much. In terms of computers and typing, you touch on such an important point. We need, and DB has acknowledged this as well, and I think they are playing for this. Before any human being, regardless of your age, before you can access the digital platforms, there's a certain set of skills that you must bring to that space. Okay? It's not such a big thing because a majority of people in this country, they type like crazy on phones. So they do know how to, they are cyber physical beings already. So all teachers in this country do have phones. But when it comes to kids, I agree with you. When it comes to computers, I was at a school, and the teacher spent the entire lesson just trying to get kids to type in their password correctly. That was the entire lesson. He had this beautiful lesson planned. So I must agree with you that we must identify the skills for accessing 4IR realities. Okay? I think that some of the other comments I do not need to comment about because people have given the answer so well. I agree with the blockchain system and, of course, convergence of technologies and services into one space. I agree with that wholeheartedly. Yes, we do need a multidiscipline approach. I see maybe we're running out of time. I see that Leon Gabriel is smiling there, giving messages through cyberspace. Thank you, Leon.
Thank you, Mr. Fries. Indeed, we are running a bit over time, but we did start a bit late. And thank you, Honorable Gigaba, as well. Our next and final presenter for this afternoon is Ms. Trudy van Beek. Trudy is Chief Director for Social Inclusion, Equity, Access and Quality at the Department of Higher Education and Training. And she'll be talking to us, as the slide indicates, on addressing inequalities in post-school education and training within a 4-hour context. Over to you, Trudy.
Thank you, Dr. Gabriel, and good afternoon, Honorable Deputy Speaker, Honorable Mgingu Gagaba, as well as honorable members and colleagues. It's for me an honor to be here, and I know I'm standing between you and a long weekend. I'm trying to do justice to the topic without spending too much time on detail. I will make my full presentation also available for sharing. First, I want to say, I found it very interesting how many times people are asking, can you hear me? Because that is a kind of artificial intelligence application that we can maybe get to Microsoft Teams and Zoom to say, can you just indicate if people are being heard or are being seen? But if we start off with the whole question about addressing the inequalities of the Fourth Industrial Revolution, I think Honorable King has said it very eloquently that it's an interdisciplinary approach that we have to follow. It is a technical revolution, but it's also an economic revolution. It's also a human revolution, a social revolution, and a transformative issue. And I just quote here the former South African Minister of Trade and Industry, what he said at the World Economic Forum. If we do nothing as a government, our companies, our schools, our universities, our TVET colleges will rapidly lose competitiveness against better organized and better supported counterparts in the world. We have to embrace the new technologies and systems, and the impact on our society and economy will be transformative. And I think that is the gist of my message today, is the transformative nature of the impact of the Fourth Industrial Revolution on education. And I've put in the bottom a block to say it is not about computers and how to operate a computer. Yes, that is necessary. And I think Mr. Mtubeni has talked about the basic literacies, and digital literacies are one of those. But we are looking at very interesting and exciting technologies about artificial intelligence, machine learning, big data, augmented reality, blockchain, Internet of Things, automation, and a lot of others. The Department of Higher Education and Training has, from its inception, had a vision of a transformed post-school education and training. And I want to take that transformative message right through my presentation. But what is very important, it's saying that it's a post-school education and training system that is responsive to the needs of the individual citizen, to get that excitement back to learning again that Mr. Fries was talking about, but also to the needs of the employers, as well as the broader societal and developmental objectives. So this slide just represents a lot of quotes that I took. And I think if you read through them, I'm not going to read through them, it's for me so important that Professor Vilakazi says that the change, the fourth industrial revolution will change the world and that we are living in. But he says there is a downside. It could be deepening inequality in an already divided society. Well, another major challenge for policymakers, and that's us all sitting in this webinar today, could be the widening also of the gender gap. And I know, Honourable King, this is for you a very, very sincere issue, is we cannot allow that we increase inequalities and widen the gender gap in society. But then also, if we look at what Professor Mawala has said, is that we have to look through the fourth industrial revolution at local problems, at Africa's problems, and have African solutions for African problems. And I will speak about that later. And then I think the responsibility of government is very important in this. And I'm very glad that the first speaker focused on the role of Parliament and the role of government and the role of National Treasury in changing the curriculum. But it influences all aspects of higher education, including the vision, policy, planning, and implementation of strategies. The next two quotations, I think this will be very important, because there we speak about the change in education. We have to create a creative mindset and the mental elasticity to invent, discover, or create something valuable to society. And we have to prepare our learners in schools, our students in the PSET system for an uncertain future. We don't know how it's going to look like. And we have to prepare it for that. And I've added the slide suddenly that just came through from the news. Our minister and the whole group of people of DSI, as well as ourselves, are currently in the US looking at innovation and inspiration to assist in the PSET system. If we look at the context of the PSET system, as you know, we've got universities, higher education institutions, 26 public, and so forth. We've got TVET and CET colleges and private colleges, and also skills development providers. And this slide is, I think, the most important slide for me in our discussion today, is what is the context of the PSET system and what is the context of the fourth IR in the PSET system. And those three bullets at the bottom is for me the gist of what we are going to talk today about, is what is the PSET contributing to the fourth industrial revolution. We're talking about innovation, we're talking about research, and that's very exciting, and that's what people are mostly focusing on. But I think more important, or as equally important, sorry, not more important, but equally important, is the provision and the production of skills of human beings with the right skills that are in line with the needs of the fourth industrial, of the world outside, that we're building the capacity for functioning in a world that is basically unknown to us. And then the last point is embracing the affordances of the fourth industrial revolution in our institutions. How do we make teaching and learning and administration better, more effective, higher quality, and more efficient? The next point I want to say, and sometimes we forget, the P6 system is a very complex system. We've got realities like social environments, different social environments. We've got highly advantaged universities, and then we also got our previously disadvantaged universities. But we also must understand that the different institutions in the PSET system have different purposes. We cannot expect every university to be a research university in the fourth industrial revolution. We cannot expect every TVET college to be a research institution, because every one of our institutions, and even within them, have got different purposes, different foci, and different program and qualification mixes that they are working on. So all universities won't have courses in artificial intelligence, in the Internet of Things, but all universities have to produce students that can enter the world of work and be complete and whole citizens when they leave the system. So please keep that in mind when we talk about the inequalities of the fourth industrial revolution in the PSET system. This slide is coming from the Presidential Commission on the Fourth Industrial Revolution. And I think this slide is for me so significant, is what are the contexts, what is the span of the systemic view of the fourth industrial revolution? And I'm not going to go through all of them. It's about learning environments. It's about accreditation and certification, about micro-credentialing, stackable qualifications, online learning, blockchain, and those kind of things. So Zubair Rahim, I think we have to include it also when we talk about stackable qualifications and online learning. Then we're also looking at teacher and lecturer reskilling, curriculum relevance, ecosystem agility and redesign, entrepreneurship, industrial linkages and relationship, and then very important is decent work. We have also released a year ago our Ministerial Task Team report on the fourth industrial revolution that was led by Professor Vilakasi, and we and the Department of Department of Science and Innovation are working together on the fourth industrial revolution initiatives as recommended by the Ministerial Task Team. What Mr. Ntubeni has said about numeracy, digital literacy, and literacy is the basic skills that's needed. And it's not that we are going to say it's not needed anymore. But school education, PSET education and training needs to think what they are called about the student mastering the 6 C's. And I think there are more C's coming because Mr. Fries talked about computational thinking, as well as cognitive agility. But we have to look at embracing culture, at collaborative work, at creativity, connectivity, communication, and critical thinking, problem-solving skills. So that is what we are looking for students coming into our system and students leaving our system. And it's so important. We don't want a student who is able to do programming and program in the highest language. We want a student who can think critically and solve a problem through programming. So it's a higher order thinking skill and a higher order skill that is required from the students coming into and leaving the system. When we then look at those 3 bullets that I said, is embracing the affordances of the fourth industrial revolution, looking at administration, teaching and learning within the PSET system. And I'm not going to read through all of these interventions because it will take a lot of time. But the department and the Department of Science and Innovation with the CSIR are looking at, or not looking, are implementing already the Sunrain initiative, where all universities and TVET colleges are already connected through broadband connectivity. We have got our CET colleges are progressively being connected, but we must just first find the permanent buildings. And then from the obligations from the spectrum licenses and the working of the Department of Communications and Digital Technologies. With us, and then there's also ministerial tasking on zero rating that we have worked with DBE on a solution to provide zero rating to all access of local content. And now we are working on a long-term solution for connectivity in the PSET. And then we also have got a very detailed strategy for expanding online learning towards a national educational network for PSET. On the infrastructure part, there's a lot of initiatives taking place. You'll see that there are enabling environment initiatives, there are collaborative initiatives with, for example, CETAs, with the private sector, as well as a very innovative infrastructure that's been put in universities and colleges. Teaching and learning, I'm not going to go in detail, but the online multimodal and blended modes of delivery that COVID has suddenly bounced us into, I hope it will maintain that we can maintain a blended learning approach and integrate ICTs in a progressive way into teaching and learning. And then we are also working in a very exciting initiative is the National Open Learning System that we are working with the Department of Science and Innovation, and we provide online learning opportunities and multimedia content for free as open educational resources. And then new emerging programs in all universities in response to the fourth industrial revolution are being reviewed and introduced to heighten entrepreneurship for job creation as well as the inclusion into the PSET system. Then furthermore, we have got inter and multidisciplinary curriculum design at university. Preparing the last revolution requires a review of the curriculum. We're planning over the MTIF. You will see the number of TVET colleges offering 4IR aligned skills training and so forth, the critical role of CETA and the industry, as well as TVET colleges' capabilities and facilities are enhanced. Then we look at the NCV curriculum, like the Department of Basic Education. We're revising information technology and computer science programs. We introduce robotics, as well as collaboration with the Germans on skills development for a green economy. And then also the last one is the capacity building for electric and plumbing lecturers that address the gaps of in-service lecturers. But we are using the 4IR technology to assist in that. In skills development, there's a growing interest in the study of awareness and intention to use and the adoption of open online courses and short skill development programs in the country. We are looking on the recognition of learning beyond the NQF, the formal qualifications, a little bit like micro-credentials. I'm very cautious when I use the word micro-credentials, but recognizing industry qualifications, board exams, international qualifications, and so forth. And then also our TVET and skills programs and our artisanal programs and the partnerships. When we've been looking at the next bullet point on my on that specific slide, where we're producing skills for the fourth industrial revolution, we are not there yet, because we are working on TVET colleges to improve the access and the success of students. We're sponsoring 4IR centers of excellence, as well as working with universities like WITS and UJ and Fort Hare and Telkom to do collaborative projects around how South Africa should respond. And this is a very important aspect of the fourth industrial revolution, is the critical dialogue that needs to take place at various levels, like this webinar. I think we have to encourage this critical dialogue throughout the system. And then research and innovation, and that's normally the exciting things that people are talking about. I got yesterday this article where they says how artificial intelligence reinforces racism in Brazil. Very interesting. They said that algorithm racism can surface in AI where they fail facial recognition to identify Black faces. And then they also said that Black Brazilians get lower credit scores because of racially biased data sets. And we talk of big data. And then interestingly, the University of Johannesburg and one of Professor Mwala's pet projects is a part of this kind of contribution to the fourth industrial revolution, where they're looking now at the speech recognition for Africa and the artificial intelligence. And he says, if you ask Siri, for example, who is Professor Mwala, he says he doesn't know, even if you use my Afrikaans accent. But if you use a very American type of accent, you will get the answer. And that is where we say we have to get solutions for African problems through the application and research and innovation in the fourth industrial revolution. And colleagues, we are the universities. It's amazing to see how they work on health, how they work in agriculture, on water, on space. There is such a lot of fourth IR initiatives in research and innovation in the university. It's really mind-boggling. And it's just, I'm so proud of South Africa. Even with our latest universities, the ranking, the international ranking of universities, where we now this year for the first time have 8 South African universities ranked in the 2002 impact rankings for universities. And that shows how significant research and innovation is. And there's other examples. I'm not going to go through them, but I think the third bullet is for me very important, where Professor Mwala says the fourth IR is the heartbeat of university innovation because it brings together the social, the economic, the human, as well as the technical world, technology world together. And then the second last one is a project by MultiChoice and the University of Pretoria, and they do artificial intelligence and machine learning. And another thing that is for me important is the last point, is the application for patents. Such a lot of innovation is taking place in South Africa, but we're not registering patents. And I think that is really very bad. The last one I want to raise is not only at universities, but in partnership with other institutions. For example, this one, artificial intelligence in student admission and predictability of success. This is a great initiative that we are busy working with within the department, is how do we predict through writing skills. We ask the students to write 4 paragraphs. And from I think there's 6,000 indicators in that data set. How do they predict from that writing what the success of the student would be? And that is artificial intelligence and big data sets. And we're very excited about this and the work that Pace Career Center is doing with us. And then if we look, and this is borrowed from the UJ website, what do we need to do as the PZ system? We have to know what is the fourth industrial revolution. We need to understand it and communicate it. But then we need to share, integrate, and collaborate in terms of research, in terms of research findings, in terms of applications. But then also, as I've said, have a healthy debate and discussion, what UJ called cloud debates. And I think that it is so important that it's not only DHET and DSI and those that must participate. It's everyone. It's every department has got a stake in this. Every private sector, industry, the research community, as well as the international community. The last 2 slides that I want to show is just what have we learned? And this is a long thing, and it's continuous learning for us also about the fourth industrial revolution. You can read through it, it's planning, it's responsive curriculum, and so forth. But the 4th bullet is, for me, a very important one, is leadership, government needs to be less risk averse. We are so scared to take risks. And that is so important in this world that we live in, is to take risks, be innovative, do research. And then the next slide also takes a few lessons that we've learned. And here I want to really focus on the second bullet. Major investment in connectivity and technology is necessary. Yes, we agree. But also effective partnership, collaboration, integration, alignment, and sharing of resources, experience, and expertise for sustainability. And we have to understand the impact of the fourth industrial revolution on society as a whole and its implications for the PSET system, and address risk, privacy, and security, and other challenges associated with the fourth industrial revolution. I want to close by asking the question, are we addressing inequalities in the PSET within the context of the fourth industrial revolution? And I think, like DBE is, we're not there yet, but we have really tried and we are really progressively working towards it. But are we really producing students in both DBE as well as DHET that have got value in culture, collaboration, creativity, connectivity, communication, and critical? And I think for government, this is also important, that we also be critical, embrace culture, work collaboratively, develop creativity, use connectivity, and communicate clearly. And then the question, are we there yet? And we can say, no, we're not there yet, but we are really working hard towards getting and South Africa to be part of the world and in the development of the fourth industrial revolution. And I want to close with the words of Professor Vilakazi, where he said, we cannot stop the change and transformation anymore than we can stop the sun from setting. So just let's embrace it. Dr. Gabriel, thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Ms. Van Wyk, and we really appreciate that you made the best of the time, also mindful of the long weekend that we are approaching. I really appreciate that, but very insightful, very informative. Unfortunately, Honorable Mkachwa, who's the chairperson of the Portfolio Committee Higher Education, Science and Innovation, was unable to join us this afternoon because she had prior engagements that she couldn't get out of. But Dr. Arendse has graciously agreed to facilitate the Q&A for this session. And then I would like to, in the interest of time, invite Ms. Linda Stofile, who is one of our senior researchers, to speak to us about the way forward and a vote of thanks and close the session. So thank you. Dr. Arendse.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gabriel. Thank you so much, Ms. Van Wyk, for that most informative presentation. I think that how the discussion has started this afternoon, it's really taking us through a process of acknowledging the fact that we cannot move away from developing the learner, the citizen holistically, and that I think ultimately we need to ensure that we all form part of the social pact from all stakeholders across the various sectors so that we can ensure that citizens are empowered and at least able, to participate at least in all of these initiatives. And I'm quite happy to hear that obviously PSET is doing a lot of work. I do see that through our committee as well, and the work that is going into the sector. And we do also acknowledge that it is a very, very huge sector. But I think that at the end of the day, if we can all come together collaboratively and partner, we can definitely achieve that. And I think maybe going forward as well, Ms. Van Wyk, especially within the context of PSET, I think we need to look at how do we ensure that through these various initiatives, how do we ensure that each and every student is able to participate and no one is left behind, as we always hear that statement from the minister. So at this stage, if there are any questions, I just see a comment from Natasha Espa. She says that the presentation was very informative and thank you very much, because there's lots of food for thought. I see that Honourable the Deputy Speaker would like to comment. Deputy Speaker, you may.
Yes, thank you very much. I also must say that I enjoyed this presentation and others as well before, because it says, as she says, there's a lot of work going on about 4IR in a variety of places, and she tried her best in the limited time you gave her to compress all of it in that short space. This is part of the problem we are trying to address, to find systems inside Parliament to be able to communicate and inform members and staff of this initiative, so that we as individuals inside the system become ambassadors, communicators of these many initiatives that are taking place. As parents, we've got children and grandchildren, and what's happening in the education environment is a matter of concern to us. So what she pointed out is very useful for that purpose. And therefore, I wanted to say to her that at Wits, there is someone there, I just forgot her name, but she's from the South African Creativity Foundation, and she coordinates efforts in the country about creativity initiatives worth talking about. Now, they, in the list of organizations they work with, the government or the public sector does not seem to be there. And so this is one area which there was inside the public service and administration, a small unit that looked at creativity and innovation in the system. I think we must bring that back as Parliament and also begin to do that job as well. Once that work has been done to identify such initiative, we become the conduit for nationally distributing it through our constituencies as members of Parliament and as staff to wherever it can happen. But what I haven't had enough of is it's not just to hook onto and piggyback on what others are generating outside, but what we ourselves are generating, what is our own solutions to our problems. I like the example she makes of, I'm aware of that, there's a TED talk about it actually, of a lady who put her hand under a dispenser and the damn thing wouldn't dispense soap until they realized the reason was because her skin was black. So the designer had not factored other diverse color situations under the dispenser. This is why it couldn't work. So it's an indicator why it is appropriate for generating our own solutions for our conditions. So, but also in a creative manner, and that we can be independent of others elsewhere, sometimes, not all the time. In other words, a partial delinking. It's an important effort. So we must identify there are people who have initiated cell phones. They have not received any support. They've initiated some interesting devices. They are not getting any support. So we need to find them and get them and give them support. But otherwise, thank you very much for what has been a very useful conversation, and her presentation was well placed where it was. Thank you very much. I appreciated it much.
Thank you very much, Deputy Speaker. Just before we close this part of the session, there are two comments on the chat. One from David Miller. He says, really good session and thank you to everyone. And then the other comment is from Mandisi. Tumche, great presentations this afternoon. Thank you very much. There are, of course, clear implications for people who work in the policy design, implementation, and monitoring space. And I guess, Mrs. Van Wyk, that as we all acknowledge that there is much for us to do, but at the same time, we are also evolving as we go along. And earlier, Ms. Big indicated that we are actually now on the verge of a fifth industrial revolution. And so I think that as we carry on, we just need to ensure that no one is left behind, and that even in the smallest way, that all the work that we do together as the various stakeholders across the sectors, we are able to ensure that we empower our citizens through these various initiatives and processes. I don't know if you just want to comment on what has been said. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Arendse. Every time I do a presentation about the fourth industrial revolution, I realize the intricacies, the agility, and even the humbleness of the human being. And how we cannot say we are so good and so wonderful, but how do we bring each other together and bring everyone on board? And I just hope that even through our research that we are doing, that we are including also the most vulnerable in our society. And that is my hope also, that the fourth industrial revolution and what it's bringing will mean for everyone something good. And that is what I hope that we also through the PC can achieve. Thank you also for this opportunity.
Thank you so much. And as Deputy Speaker just noted on the chat, the Chinese are already on the 6th. So I guess for us, let us run our own race, Deputy Speaker, at our own pace. And perhaps, one day we may catch up with them. But thank you so much. I think I can now hand over back to Dr. Gabriel. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Arendse. I think, colleagues, in the interest of time, I want to invite Ms. Linda Stoffile to tell us where to from here. So what are the next steps in terms of these webinars? And offer a vote of thanks. Thank you. Linda.
Good afternoon, Doc. My connectivity is very poor, and I can see that I'm unable to show my face to control the process. However, I wish first to thank Honorable Sinoli, the Deputy Speaker of the National Assembly. It is always good to hear him running and leading the project of 4IR, and each time he participates, he presents with passion. We are always learning a lot from his inputs. I also wish to thank the Honorable Chairperson of the Portfolio Committee for Basic Education, Honorable Bimo Gigaba. Thank you so much, Chair, for agreeing in a short space of time to be a facilitator of this project. And even though that Honorable Mkachwa and Honorable Chabeleng, your counterparts in the education portfolio, they are not here, I am sure that they would like to be with us and make some inputs. Dr. Gabriel, for your leadership. We are learning a lot from you as the division and the research unit at large. Ms. Beck, we are grateful to you. And our special guests, colleagues, Ms. Trudy and Mr. Fries, we are grateful for your presentation that you've made in this platform. Colleagues and attendees, it won't be a success. It won't be a success without your participation. According to the chart and the numbers that attended, we had 100 attendees for this first webinar of the research unit, and that is led by Dr. Arendse for the education, technology, and sports and arts and culture cluster. To the team of, I'm grateful for each and every contribution that we've made. Honorable members, what we can take from the presentations, or what can we take away from these presentations and the deliberation that is made, is that it shows that skills are very critical. Adaptation to meet where we're heading, we're already behind. So we don't have ample time to sail quickly. We need to bring along everyone. and don't leave anyone. Honorable members, I also want to remind you the COVID disruption showed how unprepared the education sector has been, and it also showed the level of inequalities in the sector and also in accessing of infrastructure, computers. So these are the things that need to be discussed or need to be prepared by providing enough budget for all the sectors and education in specific and science to ensure that everybody is brought in speed. With those words, honorable members, our managers, Dr. Gabriel, colleagues, and our presenters, I want to thank you. The next step will be a report. What is going to happen, we will consolidate the report, we'll bring everything in and come up with a report with recommendations. And the report will be posted in a site that will be prepared by, I think it's Sihle, will assist us in ensuring that the report is available. And this is not the last webinar that we want to do, Dr. Gabriel. This is the beginning of many. And we want to make sure that we are keeping all the members abreast with the information. And for the next webinars, you will see most of the researchers playing their role. Thank you, Doc. Thank you, honorable members, for your time, and our guests. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think all that is left to say is to wish everybody a peaceful and safe long weekend. And thank you all for your participation and the time that you've afforded us. Thank you.
Thank you, Doc.
Recording stopped.